at that point, when I repeatedly was trying to get this psych eval done, it was something like 6 months went by. And that entire time, I was attempting to cooperate, because CPS has your rules with family law that if you don't quote-unquote cooperate or participate and obey, basically obey a judge's order, you can lose your child for that reason. So while they were blocking me from getting these things done, they were claiming that I wasn't cooperating. And I had 2 things I had to do. I had to have urine tests to prove I wasn't using drugs, and I had to have a psych eval. And it's against the law. There is a law that states clearly that anyone who attempts to obstruct somebody or obstruct justice by keeping somebody from obeying a judicial order, an order from the judge, is guilty of a felony. And the judge had made an order that I have a psych eval. There was a time frame for which that should have been done. And CPS committed the felony of deliberately refusing to provide the funding for what they were supposed to provide the funding for, and setting that up so that I was able to get that, obey the court order. And while they were committing the felony of obstructing justice and preventing me from obeying a court order, they were trying to say that I was, mentally ill, of course, and that I was not cooperating. And when I then was back in Washington, I, of course, as I described, Michael Holt threw in her zinger, basically, as soon as I asked Alvaro to leave. And she filed something with the court right then and there, claiming that I had held up a knife and that I was psychotic. With the police backing her on everything and 3 of them going to her house to pilfer through my belongings. 3 cop cars. It wasn't 3 police officers. The neighbor told me it was 3 different Wenatchee patrol cars. When they're obviously working with Michael Holt, it's kind of obvious that the system is working against me. How was I supposed to, it was my word against hers. How do I prove to people that, and they were trying to say that I had that I was mentally ill. So how do I prove that I'm not mentally ill when she's claiming that I had a psychotic break? They felt that they could go ahead and do that to me because I hadn't had a psych eval yet that cleared me of mental illness, and they wanted to make me sound crazy after I told Alvaro to leave. People in Wenatchee were willing to leave me alone and not continue the false allegations of my using drugs or being a drug user, and the false allegations that I was mentally ill, as long as I was with Alvaro. If I asked him to leave or I wasn't with him, they basically, all of that was out. They went back to all of their crimes. And so they all reverted back to their crimes. They all began making false allegations again. And I continued to ask them to set up a psychological evaluation. And it took them, it was 6 months on the East Coast that I was asking for that evaluation. And then when I was in Wenatchee, it took them 1 year. And during this 1 year period that they refused to schedule a psychological evaluation, they were saying that I was uncooperative. I also attempted to get counseling during that time because I figured if I'm going to counseling every day, just as I'm, now talking on these video clips every day, basically, I think I'm generally, I generally sound the same pretty much day to day. But I figured if I was going to counseling, then I would be able to have that to my advantage, because I didn't think any counselor in their right mind was going to say I was mentally ill when they saw that I was not mentally ill every single day, or however long I saw them for. And I attempted to get counseling, and CPS was actually supposed to provide the funding for that, and they refused to do that as well. And what CPS did do is they made, once I was in Wenatchee, they made a pretense, like a show, of scheduling psychological evaluations. But first they stalled for about 3 months. When they stalled for 3 or 4 months, and finally scheduled the first psychological evaluation, they basically had a list of psychologists that the state regularly used. And I was really shocked, because most of those psychologists were very unethical. I wouldn't have ever assumed that just because someone's taking money from the state and getting most of their salary from the state, by doing evaluations for CPS, I never would have jumped to the conclusion that, oh, they're just working for CPS and they're not ethical people. I never would have made that, kind of a jump. But what I found is that when there were about 10 of them, I basically, CPS picked and chose. I was picking and choosing who they were going to schedule my psych eval with. And then at the very last minute, that psychologist was colluding with CPS to agree to cancel the psychological evaluation. So I'd have one set up maybe 30 days ahead of time. And we'd say, okay, look at the calendar, and I'd see, okay, this is the 7th. And she would ask me, or he would ask me if an appointment on 1 month from that time would work out in November. And I always, said yes, that would be fine. And only with the first person, the very first person psychologist that I talked to, that was the first person that I had an appointment set up with that I did not say anything to about my blog. Probably they already knew, or CPS told them. But I didn't say anything. So the first excuse for canceling the appointment, and basically I had to wait all the way up until, November 7th or so. And like the day before I was supposed to have the psych eval and hopefully have my name cleared, the psychologist called me up and said she was canceling. And the reason that I was given the first time was that, well, I saw that you have a blog and I'm not comfortable because I want you to write about me. So after that was made into an excuse for backing out after all this time. The next 10 or more psychologists that I had scheduled and assigned by CPS, I told them ahead of time, it was less than 10, actually. I later was having to call around for somebody myself, and a bunch of people were refusing to make an appointment with me. But it was maybe around 6 or 7 that CPS actually scheduled. And then they were holding on to an appointment with me for anywhere between 1 month to 2 months. I think on one occasion it was 2 months. And so every excuse that came up with the psychologist after that first one was they never had a good reason. I basically, Michelle Erickson, she decided to say, Cameo, they said it's your blog, you need to quit writing in your blog. And what I was writing in my blog is I was reporting crimes against me and my son, and crimes of things that had happened. So people didn't want me to write in my blog because their names were going online, and their coworkers were able to look at what was being said about them. That was why people didn't want me to write in my blog. So I was basically told by the judge Hotchkiss and also by Michelle Erickson that that I would not get my son back if I did not quit writing in a blog. If I kept writing a blog, they were not going to return my son to me. So they basically again tried to quash my right and freedom of speech. And with these other psychologists that were assigned to me, I let them know ahead of time, because the first one had backed out because of my blog. I said, I want you to know that I have a blog. On the very first day that I would talk to them, when they agreed to do it, I would say, I want you to know I have a blog. And please look at it, and if you have any hesitation or reservations about it, doing that, having a psychological evaluation with me, then please let me know. So it's not up at the last minute, and then time has gone by and I don't have this done, and I've lost increased visitation time with my son and getting my son back. Basically, CPS was stalling all this time to attempt to break the bond. The longer that they stalled, the more time they had with themselves and the United States as guardian of my son, and not me. So not only were they doing favors for people who are going to be sued for medical malpractice for what they did to me and my son in childbirth, because they were stalling through the statute of limitations, they were also putting things off to create they were trying to create a separation of bond with me and my son, because instead of increasing the visits, they started reducing them, the number of visits and the quality of visits. I then was also telling the psychologist before they agreed to pencil me or pen me in or whatever, I also let them know because I've been defamed and I've seen how things have been written up about me, I'm only comfortable being evaluated if I am able to document it by bringing in a tape recorder, so that I would give you a copy and I can have a copy, and as long as you're comfortable with that, I don't have a problem. So I let them know two things. I have a blog, please look at it. If you have any problem with it, let me know right away. And then the other thing was, I want to tape record our session, or however long it takes you to diagnose me, or to come up with a conclusion, and please let me know if you're comfortable with that. And so I gave them that information right at the very start. I had about 6 psychologists after that point all agree that there was no problem, it was fine. We had email correspondence as well. And then every single one of them that CPS had chosen backed out. Held on to my appointment for a month or two, and then backed out at the last minute. So then I was having to call CPS again, and they were saying, well, we have to look for somebody new, it's going to take a while. So then they would look for somebody, they finally schedule me to see someone. Maybe a week or two had gone by until they scheduled a new person, and then someone is backing out again after holding on to this for a month or two. It was totally unethical. Basically, they were stringing me along for a year. And then after they did this with as many psychologists as they knew they could do it with, they then gave me a list of people, and they said, go ahead and call them and see if anybody will do an evaluation of you. So then I was calling, and they were basically telling me to find my own person that was on their list for a psych eval. And the only person who called me back was somebody named Lucretia Krebs. And I was going to have to go all the way to Vancouver, Washington to have it done, but she said that she would do it. And at that point, I also wanted to tape record it, but she said that she couldn't agree to that. And at that point, after an entire year and a half of stalling from CPS, and then psychologists that CPS knew would stall for them, at that point, I was being told I was going to lose my son permanently because I was not complying with a court order. So they began threatening me. And because they were threatening me with the loss of my son, I basically had to just accept the next person who said okay. And she said okay, and she held on to it, and then she basically trashed